Hey everybody, JP here, and yeah, I'm on camera for a change. I figured I was going to be doing a lot of talking and probably put up some pictures here and there to go along with what I'm saying, but I thought I'd do something different for this video so you're not just staring at a Pro Tools screen since we're not using that for anything here. First of all, if you're new to the channel and you just clicked for some Dream Theater content, first of all, welcome. And a little background, I worked at Bear Track Studios for a few years in the early 2000s, and I was the assistant engineer during the tracking of 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. Now, I've gotten a lot of questions from some of my regular subscribers about what that experience was like. So I figured it was time to devote a video to it and also kind of pay homage to a bit of a mentor of mine, the main engineer on that project, Doug Oberkircher, who I think has been out of the business for quite a while now, like many people from that era. But I learned so much from Doug. I worked with him before this album. We did a Spyro Gyra album together for about 2 or 3 months and a lot of random sessions here and there. And then 6 months with Dream Theater. So, by then I kind of, knew a bit about what he liked. And we had a pretty good working relationship throughout that time and learned just so much from him. He was a real master of analog recording. And this album was recorded almost entirely on 2-inch tape, pair of Studer 820s synced up together through the Focusrite Studio Console, which we're going to get to all that in a bit. Doug also lived next door to Bear Tracks and had a wonderful home studio. When I say home studio, that really undersells it. It was isolated floors, soundproof rooms. He had a Trident 80 series console, a 3M 2-inch tape machine, 24 track, rack of Neve 1093s, EMT 251 reverb, and I think maybe 2 AMS DMX delays. So, I mean, this was like a tricked out home studio. Really fantastic. I did a lot of sessions there myself, and that studio came into play towards the end of the recording for this album too, which we'll get to. Doug was a real master of analog tape, and on this album in particular, in fact, on Misunderstood in particular, a lot of really cool things were done, which I can't wait to go over. I have a bunch of notes here that I kind of just wrote from memory. Also, I thank all of you who have asked me about what this experience was like working with the band. I hadn't really considered doing this, but, putting on headphones, listening to the album top to bottom, which I hadn't done in a really long time, maybe since it first came out, truly top to bottom. And almost like a form of like meditative auto writing. I just sort of like closed my eyes and wrote down every memory that came back to me while listening to it. And it was a lot. It was really cool. We took a ton of notes at the time because the band did take a break in the middle and we knew we were going to have to like reset up everything. God knows where those notes ended up. They might have gone to the band along with the master tapes when we were finished. They might have stayed at the studio, which closed in 2006. So if that was the case, then I'm sure they're long gone. But it's too bad because we did detail, not quite in the Randy Staub level of detail, which is a whole other thing. But we definitely took good enough notes to recreate a lot of those things for the guys, especially the drums and guitar setups, which were, really crucial to them. So yeah, the guys came into the studio in March of 2001 with nothing written. I think this was the first time they'd ever done that. They had just come off like a bit of a break from their previous tour for Scenes from a Memory. And I think they just sort of reconvened at Bear Tracks. And I'm sure they had riffs and ideas, but, they wanted to work on it together in the studio. And the idea was to be able to record things as they were written, which was great for spontaneity, which I think is something they were really aiming for. And it posed a bit of a challenge to Doug and I to be ready to just like switch gears at the drop of a hat between rehearsal mode and recording mode. So rehearsal mode, they had cue boxes, and I believe John was playing through a little line 6 floor unit. And then it was like, quickly we had to go to like main amps and all that. It was a lot of fun. It was a great experience. And again, learned a lot. Like Doug's, at that point, he probably had 20 years of experience in the industry. So learned so much from him throughout this process. So probably the biggest question I get is about Mike Portnoy's drums on that album and just how fantastic they sound, kick drums in particular. I can tell you this, the kick drums that we used, D112s, AKG D112s on each kick of the main set, that is. So the sessions started with Mike's Purple and White Monster double bass drum kit, the one he used on the previous album. Then I believe Misunderstood might have been the next song they were working on. And that was when Mike experimented with the additional drum kit, which kind of became the third bass drum, the second snare. There was a gong drum. By the way, if you've never heard a gong drum before, it's like a single-headed floating bass drum. I just want one of them in my living room to hit when I need to just like let go of some stress, because it's like a energy release hitting one of those things. Fantastic. Anyhow, so Misunderstood was really the track that sort of spawned a lot of the experimentation, and that continued on to Disappear, and even Blind Faith had a little bit. But yeah, Glass Prison started out with Mike's older drum set. D112s, they were the only kick drum mic that we had a pair of. So that was generally what we used for double bass. The outside, I think they were Neumann TLM 170s. So either TLM 170s or U89s, which are really similar mics. The U89s have a transformer. I think they have the same capsule, otherwise very similar. So if memory serves, TLM 170s on the outsides. But it's really the sound of the Focusrite ISA 110 shelving EQ, which Doug was not shy about applying liberally. And our next video is going to be that. The Brainworks plugin version of that nails it. And when you hear that, you'll know exactly what I mean. The low shelf and the high shelf, it's like there might be no better example of that EQ than Portnoy's kick drums on that album. His toms a little bit too, but of course the kick drums are a bit more front and center than the toms. Really fantastic. And yeah, Doug was not afraid to use EQ during tracking to get what he wanted. Especially that EQ, which is very natural sounding. You do extreme boosts and it really never went like overboard or anything. Snare drums, Mike's custom snare drums. I believe his the Melody Master snares from Tama. I think the metal one was already out, and the maple one, he might have just came out at NAMM that year. So he was excited to use that, and eventually the kit had both of them on it. You know, one thing about Mike that I have to say, first of all, man, he was a blast. I mean, just the infectious energy. I don't know what the band was like when he wasn't in it for that, decade or so that, they were on the outs or whatever. But at that time in 2001, he was the energy. He was the infectious driving energy behind that band, and all the work he did with their fan club and everything. Petrucci as well. I mean, they were co-producers, right? And I kind of saw Petrucci as kind of the leader that brought everyone together in a way that, most bands need, especially a 5-piece with, really everyone in that band's at the top of their game technically, right? But Mike's energy was just, it's like riding a wave working with him. But in terms of his drumming, guy's fantastic, right? I don't need to tell that to anyone. But his strokes are so controlled. I don't remember him changing drum heads. He probably changed his snare heads from time to time. I don't really remember that happening because we would have probably had to move the mics and, all that. His drum tech, Jose, set up his drums and, he added the extra ones to it, a few weeks in or a month in. And I don't really remember anything changing. And they always sounded fresh and like he just knows how to hit them. And I think that just comes from that skill level. It's like guitarists like Petrucci have a certain touch on the instrument that just, they just know how to do it without beating the hell out of it like some other guys, right? So, so I think Mike's, obviously the way he plays goes a lot with that sound. And yeah, kick drums, definitely the Focusrite, really very pillowy sound. That's especially the low end on the Focusrite, very pillowy. And again, we're going to get into that. We're going We're going to EQ a kick drum in a similar manner and also compare it to some other EQs just to show the difference. A few more notes on the drum miking before I forget. Toms were 421s, top only. Frankly, with that many drums, we barely had enough 421s. I think we used some from Doug's home studio, actually. I might have even I owned one or two. I might have brought them in at the time. Snares were just 57s on top, and I think 57s on the bottom. If Doug used something else on the bottoms, they might have been 414s, but I don't remember off the top of my head. And if anything, they were pretty low in the mix. We went over the kick drums. The third kick drum, that was a little different. We used an old vintage AKG D12 on the inside and a 47 FET on the outside. We only had one 47 FET. Otherwise, if we had a pair, we probably would have used them on the main kicks. But that was on the third kick. The gong drum got a 421, just like the toms. Overheads, this was interesting because we couldn't cover the whole kit with just a pair of overheads. So Doug really liked, we had these silver 414s, a pair of them. We had a pair of those. They would have been like 414 EBs. And then we had a pair of the darker 414s, the more recent ones. So the EBs had the CK12 capsules, and they had a great top end on them. In fact, they were James Labree's second choice for a microphone after the C12. And we actually used the 414 for his backing vocals just to give them, a little variance. So we had two silver 414s over the kit, and we would move them depending on which side of the kit Mike was on. I guess like we left one in the middle and then we moved the outside one. It was either the left one on the main kick or the right one on the smaller kit. So that was fun. And again, me being the gopher, I got to run out and change that whenever Mike wanted to switch up sides. So that was kind of fun. Let's see. Guitars. Yeah. So John started out, he showed up with a rectifier head. I know the 3-channel rectifiers, I think, just came out that year. So he might have had like a brand new one. I think they debuted at NAMM that year. So he definitely started out with the rectifier. That definitely made it onto Glass Prison, at least the rhythm tracks of Glass Prison. And probably, about a month in, his tech, Mark Snyder, brought him a couple of, now vintage Mark II C Plus heads, the old hardwood with the wicker grills. So he kind of switched to them. I think he did, I would say probably almost all of his solos through those, if memory serves correct. And we had different settings on them for like solos, rhythms, and cleans. And, I was kind of the gopher that ran out and changed them, in between different takes. So that was one thing. He had a Mesa Heartbreaker head as well. And I think that was kind of more vintagey, like in between tones. I was listening to Blind Faith, and I think he either used the Heartbreaker for some of those rhythm sounds on Blind Faith, or maybe it was one of those in-between modes on the rectifier. I can't remember, but they were all there. In addition to having his main 4x12 mic'd up out in the big room, we had a pair of stereo cabinets in the ISO booth, along with his Eventide and TC2290 delay and power amp, so that he could always do like a wet-dry thing if he wanted to, stereo, mono dry, stereo, wet. That was definitely used for some clean effects. I remember doing like a real swirly thing with the Eventide, kind of like a phasey left to right thing going on with them. And I think all of his leads were done dry. And we had 3 mics on the main 4x12 for the leads, 57, RE20, and a Beyer M160. And that was his lead sound. No compression. I don't remember Doug using compression on any of the tracking aside from vocals. And that was just an LA2A. LA2A on the vocals that were done at Bear Tracks, and probably his Summit TLA 100 at the stuff done in his studio. That's it. So I don't remember any compression on that stuff. There were some sounds Jordan was using, some keyboard sounds that were kind of retro-y, like some of the Hammond organ sounds and Mellotron sounds on Disappear in particular. I think we ran some of that stuff through like the Fairchild compressors. We had a pair of 660 mono Fairchilds. I think some of that probably went through either the Fairchilds, Pultex, just for, a little something else of the era to kind of add to those. Yeah, that's all I remember compression wise happening. The rectifier, John's rectifier, that was also used for some bass fuzz and keys. There was at least one keyboard solo, and I can't remember which. I think it was one of the ones where John and Jordan either double or harmonize with each other. And we ran Jordan's Kurzweil sounds through the rectifier and mic'd it up. Yeah, can't exactly pinpoint where. There's one on Blind Faith after the regular keyboard solo where they do some stuff together. That could be it, but yeah, from memory, I can't remember exactly what. In terms of bass, though, the 8-string bass on Blind Faith. So they were all King's X fans, and the idea of using an 8-string bass on the intro popped up. And John Myung didn't have one, so he found 30th Street Guitars in New York had one. That's back when they were actually on 30th Street. Now they're like a couple blocks away. But anyway, they had one. So John called them up, ordered it, paid for it over the phone. And then, Manhattan on a weekday, parking anywhere sucks. So I drove him in, and the plan was he would just hop out of the car, grab the bass, and we'd come right back, as quickly as possible. So if you've ever gotten off the West Side Highway onto 30th Street, there's a point where 30th Street there's a median and it splits. And on the left, it takes you into the Lincoln Tunnel outbound. And to the right takes you down 30th Street proper. Somehow, maybe this was the first time I was coming from that direction or what, I ended up on the left side. And in a panic, thank God I had an SUV, my old 4Runner, took it over the median and did not blow a tire or get a ticket, thankfully. And then on 30th Street, and yeah, double park, John ran in and got the bass. It felt like a SWAT team mission. That was kind of awesome. So John Myung, he and I were kind of smoking buddies on this album. We were the only two people that still smoked cigarettes back then. And I've since quit, and I hope he has too. But yeah, that was, it was kind of really fun hanging out with him because, we'd take our little smoke breaks, and he was such a quiet dude, but I kind of just felt like kind of honored that he liked hanging out with me, I guess. And, towards the end of the project, cigarette breaks turned into like having a cigar and a beer to kind of celebrate finishing a song, that sort of thing. And I think Doug joined us a couple times too. But anyway, yeah, sweetheart of a guy. And I think a lot of you have asked me what I was most impressed by or what I thought was like the most underrated aspect of the guys. And I mean, when you have a band with 5 guys who are at the top of the level of technical proficiency, it's actually a really tough question. But the 2 things I will say, John Myung's contributions, the bass lines he comes up with that fit with everything else going on. It's remarkable, really. I mean, I've played enough bass in bands to know how tough it is to just kind of find your pocket and, not overplay, but also play enough that, fans want to hear him do some cool stuff, right? So there's like a line there of getting the right sound and fitting it in the right place. And I was just blown away by how well he does that. Great stuff. Most of his sounds he was using, he had just gotten a bunch of Demeter gear at the time. I think that was a new thing for him, like a new endorsement or something. So he was using the Demeter gear along with some SWR stuff, mostly his Yamaha basses. There was an Ernie Ball 5-string Stingray that John Petrucci got him. John had just switched to Ernie Ball then too. That was first album I think he used any of those on, after using Ibanez for like a decade. So I believe they used John's rectifier for some of the bass fuzz. You can hear it kind of at the end of Blind Faith on the 8-string. I think there's more of it on Disappear later on. They were going for like a real Radiohead kind of fuzzy thing. Other than that, I know Myung's chorus and flanger effects came from his Eventide. I think he and John both had Eventide 4000s. A funny thing, 6 or 7 years ago, I'm mixing a basketball game for NBA TV. It was a San Antonio Spurs home game. And you know how they do the big dramatic arena, player introductions and hype videos and stuff like that. All of a sudden, the lights go down in the arena. I'm in the audio booth. I'm mixing it remotely from the NBA headquarters here in Secaucus. And lights go down in the arena, and all of a sudden the song comes on, and I'm like, when you can't put your finger on something, but it's like ingrained in you from the past. So I'm hearing this intro. It's a bass intro, and I'm like, what is this? I know this. I was like, going through the mental list, and then it wasn't till either the keyboard melody kicked in, that Jordan did kind of a Mogi thing on that intro, or maybe it was even when the full band kicked in with the main riff that I recognized that it was Glass Prison from Dream Theater. But it was one of those like, wow, like at that point, it was probably 15 years after I worked on it, and hadn't listened to it in a while, clearly. And it was just really funny to hear that at a basketball game that I was mixing. So I don't know, small world. The other underrated aspect of the band, James LaBrie's vocal stamina. That guy can sing full power for 8 hours a day. And it's just blew my mind. I hadn't really worked with anybody that could do it for that long, that consistently, like 8 hours a day, day after day. We did the vocals for the first batch of songs, and then the vocals for the big 40-minute overture, or this title track, later on. I think the vocals for the title track were done almost entirely at Doug's studio. We rented an AKG C12, a vintage C12. That was James' preference. And I think if you have a really keen ear and you listen very closely, you might hear a slight difference in tone between his vocals on the first 5 tracks and his vocals on the title track. Because the only difference was that he went through a Neve 1093 at Doug's studio and in the Summit TLA 100, versus the first 5 tracks were done at Bear Tracks through the Focusrite console and a vintage LA 2A. But it's really subtle. I do think I can hear that difference. But again, I mean, you're splitting hairs. They both sound great, right? Actually, the lozenges that James used, I was so impressed by his vocal ability that I can't remember their name now, but it was they were for opera singers in particular. And I went out and kept my little home studio stocked with them when I worked with guys. I was like, you need these, because apparently you can sing like Superman if you take them. Obviously, there's a lot more going into James' vocals than that. But I absolutely thought that was an underrated part. I love James' voice. Absolutely love it. All the vocals were recorded into Paris, eventually transferred into Pro Tools along with everything else. And all this is synced up through timecode, the tape machines, the DAWs, all this stuff, it has to be for it all to work. Timecode is your greatest friend and the biggest pain in the butt ever, but you need it. Yeah, back then you needed it anyway. Well, before we get to tape stuff, there was one other big kudos I have to give Doug Oberkircher. So we had 2 tape machines synced up. That's 48 tracks of playback plus mic inputs. The way the Focusrite console was designed, it was not an inline console like an SSL or AMAC or whatever. And it was not a true split console. It was effectively a split console. And split console, like the old Neves, have a dedicated area for tape returns. So you've got your mic inputs one side, your tape returns down the ends. The Focusrite was just 72 channels. They were identical. And the way we used them, again, like a split console, was one side were mic inputs and the other side were tape playbacks. Problem is, when you've got 48 tape playbacks during tracking and you need all those mic inputs for drums in particular, but the guitars took a lot, bass, we started running out of real estate pretty fast as the song started building and building. And especially when Mike added this second drum kit and, it's as projects go on, more stuff gets added to them, right? So Doug had a brilliant idea, as he often did. we started using on the input channels, so on the mic input channels, we were basically cutting them off at the insert point. We were taking the insert send, which was a half normal on the patch bay. We were taking the insert send and using that to go directly to tape with certain things that didn't need an output fader because you lose the back end. And really, that's not so different than the way a lot of us work now, because so many mic preamps and input channels that we use in our DAWs don't have an output fader on them either. You know, I think maybe half of mine do, but not all of them for certain. So we were kind of doing that. We were taking the insert send and using that to go to tape. And then on the insert return, which when you patch into the insert return, that fully broke the normal of the channel, we would have tape inputs coming back on the returns. So you were monitoring tape on the big faders and sending input to tape without a fader on the same channel. I thought that was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And I think we might have used some of the built-in stereo effects returns. We might have used those for monitoring keyboards, actually, now that I think about it, because we had the 480 coming back on 2 pairs of them, the Lexicon 480 reverb, which was definitely used for monitoring. You know, put a little reverb on the snare, put a little reverb on the vocals just for headphone monitoring. So we probably used the other 2 stereo returns for, I think it was keys, now that I think about it. But I thought that was brilliant. We basically turned the Focusrite into an inline console. The only thing missing was we didn't have a little small fader to set levels to tape with. But again, I thought that was a really brilliant thing by Doug. The tape stuff. So Misunderstood opened the door for so much creativity. And I haven't really kept up with the bands so much since then, but it's probably the most experimental song I think they might have ever done, between that and Disappear. But Misunderstood has a lot going on. So the reverse guitar solo. This was, I don't know where John got the idea. It's similar to something George Harrison did decades before, but I'm not positive where Petrucci got the idea from. But the way this worked was he played a guitar solo. He wanted it to sound like it was reversed, but he wanted the melody to be what he wrote playing it normally. So again, we had 2 machines synced up for this. Let me make sure I get it right. I wrote down exactly how I wanted to do it. So he recorded the solo normally. I think what we did when we were doing guitar solos, we were doing them on the slave reel, the second reel. So what we would generally do, because you don't really want to punch in on sync tape machines because that's just very problematic. So I'm pretty sure we made a submix of the rhythm tracks, like a stereo submix. We printed that in sync onto the second machine, then turned off the sync, used the second machine to punch in the guitar solos with the submix as the reference, resynced them, and then didn't need the submix anymore because now the guitar solos on that second machine were in time with the real rhythm tracks on the main machine. So starting with that, Petrucci wrote the solo, performed it the way, the way he wanted it to go down melodically. Then we physically flipped the tape over on that second machine. And you have to literally remove the reel, and then when you play it back, track 1 is now track 24. Everything gets flipped, and it's backwards. So he relearned how to play the solo by listening to it backwards. He had to learn the melody backwards on his guitar. I think we did this like section by section or line by line, because it's really challenging to do. So he learned how to play it backwards, recorded it that way, now onto a separate track, recorded it, played it, recorded the backwards solo forwards, okay? Then flip the tape back to normal, and now you're hearing the same melody that he originally recorded forwards, but with the sound of backwards tape. And that was mind-blowing. I would not have known how to do that, and Doug Doug did. I don't know if he'd done it before or if he just figured it out on the spot, but that was, I was blown away by that. And that's something I'll never forget. Even though, again, you have to kind of go through the steps in your mind, right? Even I have them written down and it's still tricky. Maybe because my handwriting is junk, but that's called job security, by the way. When you write your notes so bad that you are the only one that could read them, yeah, that'll keep you employed. Let's see the other tape thing. Okay, so on that same song, underneath the drums, underneath the guitar solo, this was really cool. This was Mike Portnoy's idea. And what you do is, see, all their click tracks, when they're writing songs, Jordan Rudess maps out the tempo changes in a MIDI sequencer in Digital Performer. That's synced with the multi-track machine via timecode. So we transfer the click track onto tape. So all the tempo changes are right where they want them to be. And also that way he can mess around on the MIDI sequencer and everything he does will still be in time with the main tracks. So the click is on tape. This is important because you need it for the reference. What we did was Mike played the drums the way he normally did. And just for this one section, the guitar solo section, and then later on in the outro, he did this too. What you do is on the Varispeed of the Studer machine, you speed it up. You kind of have to figure out what works because the more you speed it up, the more dramatic the effect is going to be. And it can be too dramatic and it can sound like the drums are falling apart. We didn't want to quite take it that far. But you speed up the tape machine enough and Mike had to then play the part faster. And that's why the click track reference is key. So he plays the drum part faster. Then when he's finished with the drum part, you return the tape to normal speed. And now the drums are detuned and kind of have a laggy kind of vibe to them. Just listen to, the drums underneath the guitar solo in Misunderstood and again in the outro. Really, really killer stuff. We did a similar thing on Disappear, but this was not the full drum kit. It's just when the big stereo drums come in, there's a big cymbal wash that goes along with them. So Mike played the cymbals normally when he recorded the part. Then we went back and we overdubbed more cymbals. I don't remember if they were the same cymbals, probably different because, he had like 25 of them on his kit. But the same thing, we sped up the tape. He hit just the cymbals. I think it was on the downbeat of like not each bar, but like each segment, each repeating segment of that part of the song. And then when you play them back at normal speed, the cymbals are detuned and have this beautiful wash to them. And they sound massive. They sound incredible, especially on that song. They just fit so perfect. So kudos to Portnoy for having that idea and Doug knowing how to achieve it. Because I learned how to do that on that session. And then I did it with one band in particular I worked with a year or two later. Probably the one local indie band I had the most success with as a producer was a band called Paulson. And we actually tracked their drums at Doug's Little Bear Studios. And for, I think, 2 tracks, we did that where we sped up the tape. The band had a phenomenal drummer, Jeff Weimer, something like that. Phenomenal drummer. And he played the drums a little faster. And then we got this beautiful, toms were nice and detuned, snare was detuned, cymbals had this beautiful wash to them. Really, really cool. So something else I learned from Doug. Actually, another thing on Misunderstood. This was really cool too. It's really brief, but it's before the drums kick in proper. There's this little section where Mike overdubbed. It was octobans and hi-hat. I think he was using his Max Stack cymbals, which are named after his son. And he's kind of doing these little fills between the octobans and the hats. And what we did was, what Doug did, and I I stood by and learned, was manual tape flange. This is where the name flanger comes from, right? So what you do is you need 2 machines synced up. You record them on the first machine. Then you transfer an exact copy in sync onto the second machine. Then you play them back at the same time. And on the second machine, you lag, you kind of just hold your hand on the tape flange as it's going. Now, on synced machines, you can't do this too much or it'll drop sync and it becomes a pain. But if you do it just enough, you get a nice natural flange effect. And you have to record now the output, the mix of both of these sounds together onto its own track of the first machine, of the non-manipulated machine. So you've got octobans and hi-hat on the first machine, copy of them on the second machine, slowly dragging your hand on the second machine to induce the flange effect, record the output of that onto a spare track of the first machine. And I believe while Doug was manually doing the tape, I think I was the one doing the console blend and actually recording it using the remote, the tape remote. There was one other effect that we did on the song Disappear, where it was like an all hands on deck thing. And it was Petrucci doing a feedback thing with a Boss delay pedal. He was holding a note with an ebow, manipulating the feedback on the pedal. Doug was punching it in and out of tape. And I was doing something with the faders that was like killing one and bringing up another or something. And in the making of video, Portnoy's camcorder footage, there is a second of that in there. It made me crack up when I saw it, because I remember that was like, okay, everybody had to learn their part. We probably rehearsed it, and really cool and stuff like that. It just doesn't happen anymore. Really cool stuff. Vocal effects. Doug was a big fan of the Ensoniq DP2. It was like a little 2-engine processor from the early 90s, mid 90s, something like that. It had a real character. I mean, you talk about, this is like a real character digital piece. Absolutely not transparent. And they were kind of ahead of the game in terms of like simulating guitar amps. I don't know how well it was. It had an instrument input in addition to line level. And it did some like, guitar amp distortions and speaker simulators. It did really cool rotating speaker effects. And it was great for like telephone, like lo-fi telephone effects. So a lot of the vocals on the album that you hear lo-fi stuff on, we recorded it that way through the DP2s. Again, the band really didn't want to leave stuff up to chance in the mix. They wanted to take care of all that stuff as best as they could during the tracking, and really cool. I briefly had an Ensoniq DP4, which was a 4-engine. It was basically like a pair of DP2s in one casing. And I remember loving, there was a particular effect. It was like an auto wah with distortion that was meant to be used on guitar. And it was so cool on vocals, because when the vocalist really belted something out, it kind of, opened the wah, but then went back down to kind of like a lower lo-fi thing. Really cool effect. Let's see. Make sure I'm not forgetting anything. I guess I could always make another video. Yeah, the EBO experimentation, Petrucci, we talked about that a little bit. Oh yeah, also on Disappear, I just want to give them kudos for having the balls to put the drums in mono on one side only. Might not seem like a big deal these days. You'll say, oh, Radiohead did that 20 years ago. Yeah, Dream Theater did it before Radiohead by a few years. The Radiohead one of Reckoner, I think, does a similar thing. Yeah, Dream Theater had them beat by a few years on that. And I do remember Mike talking about it and how the drums would initially come in just on the right in mono. And then I forget, I think the keyboard was playing the piano on the left. Something was keeping rhythm on the left. But then later on, when the full stereo drums kick in with those overdub cymbals that I mentioned, whew, huge, so cool. Yeah, that was just, it's a throwback to like the early days of stereo when guys just didn't know. Everything was recorded in mono still. So mixing in stereo was kind of like a new weird thing. And that's why I listen to some of the stereo mixes of like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones from that era. And it's like the bass is on one side, the drums are on the other. The concept of putting things down the middle really wasn't there yet. Took a little bit to develop that. It took stereo. Stereo was a fad. It was almost like 5.1, in a lot of ways. But but of course it became the norm fairly quickly. And one last thing about the title track, the big 40-minute banger at the end, that was written last, and it was recorded after the band took about a month off in the middle. Petrucci did the G3 tour. Portnoy played with him on that tour. I'm sure all you diehards know that whole story, right? So band comes back. We had to, reset up everything the way it was, essentially, to get the same sounds back for the drums and guitar and everything. And most of that 40-minute song was tracked the same as the rest, tracked to tape. The exception being, so at the end, they were in crunch time because they had already booked mix time with Kevin Shirley for the month of September, the early September. So we were kind of frantically finishing stuff at Bear Tracks while they were starting to mix in the city. And at this point, this is where having worked with Doug and having, gained his trust and learned so much from him really came in handy, because he was doing vocals with James at his studio, Little Bear. And I was back at Bear Tracks transferring keyboards and finishing up bass with Jordan and John. And while Petrucci and Portnoy were kind of going back and forth, but, mixing was obviously the priority, making sure that those first 5 songs were mixed the way they were happy with. So, it was a bit frantic. That was, I think that was the only bass track on the album to be recorded straight into Pro Tools. But, I was using Doug's sounds, but, I was kind of running that in Pro Tools with John Myung, and, transferring all the orchestrated parts. I think the main reason we were doing that straight into Pro Tools was because of how many tracks it took up. I don't think we would have been able, we probably would have needed a third reel of tape to fit them all, because he got pretty creative with his orchestration on that stuff. So yeah, all that was transferred into Pro Tools along with the analog tracks while Doug was finishing up vocals on his Paris system in his studio. And then eventually we brought it in. I delivered that and the rental AKG C12, which, hindsight, knowing what a C12 goes for these days, which is like probably over 20 grand for a nice vintage one. We rented that from Toy Specialists, which went out of business along with half the industry. Probably paid $75 a day for that microphone for at least a month, maybe more, because we did vocals in 2 sort of, before the break and after the break. Thinking back, I should have bought one of those back then. Probably could have got one for under 10 grand, used the rental money to help pay it off, and could have had it these days and maybe sold it for a, nice considerable profit. But that's hindsight, right? With vintage gear. Wish I bought all of it back then. So yeah, that was a bit frantic. And of course, the guys, the diehards know this story already, I'm sure, but the song The Great Debate was originally called Conflict at Ground Zero. They were literally mixing it when 9/11 happened. So if you listen to the chorus, the line is still in there, Conflict at Ground Zero. They could not call it that at that particular time anyhow. So yeah, it was changed to The Great Debate. Literally, I think it might have been even after it was mixed that they changed the title. Yeah, crazy stuff. Let's see. Yeah, the Focusrite. Earlier, we talked about the sound of the Focusrite on Portnoy's kick drums. I want to talk about, this is we're going to speak in generalities here, because obviously the men behind the board makes all the difference in the world. The sound of the Focusrite console, pillowy low end, big low end, forward low end. No matter how much you boost the top, the low end always felt a little closer to you on those boards, but they did have tremendous clarity and warmth at the same time. The top was like silky top. I think that 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence might be the best representation of what tracking on a Focusrite Studio Console sounds like. I say that because it was mixed by Kevin Shirley on the SSL 9000J, which is an incredibly transparent console. Way more transparent than anyone would ever call the Focusrite. The Focusrite was clean, but it was warm. The SSL, totally different thing, the 9000J. And I think it preserved the sound. The combination of like transferring it to Pro Tools, really preserved the sound and then mixing it through the 9000J. If you want to look at the other albums that were engineered by Doug, well, he did Images and Words. That was tracked and mixed at Bear Tracks, but that was back when Bear Tracks had an SSL 4000. It was before the Focusrite. So let's kind of forget about that one for now. The next one that he worked on would be Change of Seasons. Probably my favorite personally, actually. That was tracked and mixed on the Focusrite. I believe it was the only one, the only thing by that band that was tracked and mixed entirely on the Focusrite. The next, and I think that sounds absolutely huge. Maybe too huge, but I think the low end is just massive on Change of Seasons, especially on whatever master version is on Tidal Hi-Fi that I listen to. It just sounds, on my car, it sounds huge. The next one would be Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from Memory, tracked by Doug on the Focusrite. A lot of the same drums, same room, same microphones. That was mixed by Kevin Shirley at Avatar Studios on a 4000E. In my opinion, you can hear it, the sound of the 4000E. And it's not a bad thing, but it's a little crunchy. You know, that board could really be pushed in a way that Andy Wallace and Randy Staub and those guys love. So again, not a bad thing, but a noticeable thing when you compare them. Again, we're talking broad generalities here. The next thing would be 6 Degrees, like I said, mixed on a 9000J. Then take it to the next album, Train of Thought, which Doug engineered, but not at Bear Tracks. They recorded that out in Long Island. They tracked the drums at Cove City, which is owned by Billy Joel's sax player. Remember his name offhand. Tracked on an SSL. So I remember Doug using the SSL along with his Neve 1093s, which he only had 4 of. So I was there for the first day because the band bought a Pro Tools HD rig for that album. And Doug was working with them on it. Doug didn't have the time to set it up himself. He had it sent. We used to get all our stuff from John Haber at Alto Music. Now, Alto Music now is massive. But back then, it was a local place. And John lived right by Bear Tracks. So we used to order all our gear from them. So Doug ordered the Pro Tools rig through John. It got delivered to me. I spent a day putting it together along with a new computer for them and everything. And then I delivered it to them out at Glen Cove, at Cove City Studios on their first day of tracking. So got to, say hi to the guys once more and hang for that. So yeah, Doug was using the SSL 4000 mic preamps. I know everybody says they suck. Well, he used them there, and his Neves, and probably used the Neves for, kick and snare. The studio may have had some other outboard stuff, but I'm not sure. I remember seeing him get drum sounds with the SSL. Then they cut guitars and additional, probably bass and keys as well at Pi Studios in Long Island. Pi Studios is my favorite studio in the New York area. It's got a Neve 8078, all discreet, meticulously maintained. It's owned by Perry Margoliff, who's a vintage gear nut. He's like best friends with Jimmy Page. And yeah, Perry's the man. And Pi Studios, I think it's the best studio in this part of the country, frankly. Anyway, they cut their guitars and additional overdubs there. And then it was mixed by Kevin Shirley. I would assume on the 9000J at the Hit Factory, because Kevin kind of set up shop there for a few years. So I would assume it was probably the same room that 6 Degrees was mixed in. And I think it's a great example of what Portnoy's drums in particular sound like going through something other than the Focusrite. So that's your comparison. I would say really, really study the way his drums in particular sound on that album, which to me, it's more of a modern metal sound, or at least he was going in that direction with it. Whereas there's a unique sound to those Focusrites. It's pillowy. It's not very aggressive. It doesn't have that aggressive attack. But again, in a band with so much going on, I kind of thought that worked really well on those albums. Especially 6 Degrees. Yes, I'm biased, but Mike did give me an autograph. He was signing autographs for the fan club, and he signed one for me. And it said, "Dear JP, eat my ass and balls, Mike Portnoy." And I had it hanging up. I had a staff job at Fox Studios for about a decade, and I had it hanging up in the wall. I have no idea what happened to it. I really hope I find that someday. And if I ever do, I'll put up a picture of it here on YouTube or something. But yeah, I thought that was really cool. Now it's going down this nostalgia trip and kind of checking in to see what they're up to these days. I know they just played Nassau Coliseum, which is like hometown gig for all those guys, for at least the Long Islanders in the band, which is like three of them. Super cool. So I couldn't be happier for them. And when I think back to my time at Bear Tracks, that album in particular is the one my mind immediately goes to. I worked on some other really cool projects, Anthrax probably being the next one on my list, which I was originally going to do this video on both of those albums, but I quickly realized I just had way more to say about Dream Theater. So I'll probably do Anthrax separately sometime. But yeah, like this is the album I think of when I think of like that time of my life, and really all the analog tape tricks that I learned from Doug, and what a brilliant engineer he was. And it's sad that the industry, so many great engineers that just needed to make a living because they had families, had to bail and do something else. So yeah, real shame. But anyhow, I hope you guys love this. If you have more questions, please feel free. I'll do a part 2 and answer some of your questions. I definitely got to most of them here, at least according to my notes. Yeah, if you're new, please like, comment, subscribe. I really appreciate all of it, and I hope you all really enjoyed this. Again, I'll be back soon with Focusrite EQ video, kick drums in particular we're going to get into, and also a really cool dynamics trick you can do back in the old 130 dynamics modules that we had in that console. The Brainworks plugin nailed it really well, so I can't wait to share that little trick with you guys. I think you'll appreciate it, especially on drums. All right, so until then, take care. Hope you're all doing great. Bye.